Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll resume with the first meeting where we have reviewed the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner's Fire and Rescue Plan. So I'll hand over to the Commissioner in his new role and look forward to hearing about it.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. So obviously you're right. This is the first fire and rescue plan, which represents the end of a product, a great deal of hard work by members of my team, Darren's team, and their colleagues in the Fire and Rescue Service. Back in February, I set out a budget to you and explained how I intended to bring financial stability and investment into the service. I was proud that this was this year's first budget and the first one in a generation in which the budget for the Fire and Rescue Service has not faced cuts and is a significant new chapter in the history of the service. Today's plan sets out the future strategic priorities of the service, but at its heart there are three overarching themes. These are preventing fire and other emergencies to keep people safe, protecting the public and stabilising the organisation. Underpinning this will continue to be a culture of continuous improvement that fosters learning between the organisations to best serve the people of Northamptonshire. We also need to ensure the well-being of our staff, who do a very difficult job under very demanding conditions, so they are better able to protect the public and deliver what is required of them. Madam Chairman, it is clear from the consultation that the Fire and Rescue Service are held in very high regard by local residents. A sizable majority of them were also supportive of greater collaboration working between Fire and Rescue Service and the police, as long as any joint working does not affect the quality of the service provided. Over 70% of respondents also agreed that the proposal to undertake joint preventative activities with the police, respond to medical emergencies where the ambulance service were unable to do so, and to support the police in searching for missing people. Residents are very supportive of this, as long as it didn't take away firefighters from doing their cool role. Residents are also prepared to pay more for people, and they're prepared to pay more for a more comprehensive service, and I'm keen to explore how we can make this a reality and let them make the difference in the county. We are in a unique position, and I know there is much to gain from bringing our emergency services closer. I do want to make it clear that though the change of governance has never been about merging with the police, nor about building an empire, I truly believe that through closer working with the two services, better services can be delivered to keep our communities safe. I know that's a view shared by our Chief Fire Officer, who very kindly joins us today to help answer any questions, but don't keep him too long because he's got to get a parking ticket if we're not out of here by 5, I think it's done. Sorry, I thought I'd get that in, Darren. There are a couple of concerns that have arisen from the recent inspection of the Fire and Rescue Service taken by HMIC, where the level of the cover provided by Fire and Rescue and the training that they undertake. These are currently being addressed and will of course provide an update to the panel at a future meeting. Madam Chairman, today's plan represents a significant step forward for our Fire and Rescue Service, and I commend it, and we're happy to take questions from the panel.
Well, thank you very much. It's very interesting reading and fascinating the background documents as well of the scope of the work that you do and the magnificent way you do it with very few resources, and I'm very pleased that the Commissioner is able to basically put back money into capital so that you can eventually, when you need to replace equipment, you'll be able to do that, and also have some reserves and that you haven't had for for a while. So I don't know what you want to say about that.
I think there's just one thing I kind of do want to say. I think it's a fantastic step forward for the Fire and Rescue Service, but I also don't want any of the answer to the questions that we're probably about to give. No one's saying that the Fire and Rescue Service's time in the County Council wasn't a challenging one with the decisions that kind of needed to be made there. And actually, I think one of my challenge in any Fire and Rescue Service that kind of remains in a county council with the current funding formulas actually has significant challenges. Unless adults and children's is better funded and social care to actually make sure all county councils are sustainable, I believe provides a kind of major risk. And so I wouldn't want anything we might say to kind of be as though this is something that is bad for the county council. I commend them also for their brave work. We couldn't have done this without working together to kind of bring them to fruition. So I don't want anyone to kind of take that this is somewhat sort of, and I'm not countenance anyone kind of bashing the county council. They had a very difficult, challenging financial environment, but I'm very pleased about the kind of new set of directions, and particularly commend the work that everyone's put into achieving this.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Auger.
Yeah, thank you. It is, it's amazing what the fire service do. I think traditionally getting out a hose and putting out a fire has well been extinguished. Yeah, you see what I did there. I suppose I suppose also ambulance as well, but one of the critical areas of your business is getting there on time, isn't it, is your response times. And I was looking at your response times on 29, and I don't understand your area of business that well to understand, the difference between 28 seconds, getting there 28 seconds late. I can hazard an intelligent guess that could be significant in some ways. But my question is more broadly about over the years. Why do response times, why do they vary? If bearing in mind your assets are in the same place, you're probably dealing with the same sort of incidents, why would they vary? Or is that not a significant variance that we should worry about? Does that make any sense? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so hello everybody, first of all. First time I've been here. I know I've met most of you in other guys anyway, but yeah, so response time. So what you'll see is nationally, response times have reduced across the board probably over the last 20 years. And it's a fairly sort of complex picture with regard to that. A lot of that is due to things like more traffic calming, more development, different types of fire engines, people parking in stupid places more and more. Lack of parking, generally when new developments are built, or the more vehicles are on sort of roads that were never designed for parking for that many vehicles, as you'll see in lots and lots of streets around all of our sort of towns and cities. Coupled to that, there will have been, again, nationally, closures of stations. We haven't had any closures of stations in Northamptonshire, but what we will have on a day-to-day basis is some of our retained stations, part-time stations, not available effectively. And what that does sometimes is it then starts to pull resources around the country. So add all those things in together, and in general terms, you'll see a decline in response standards over a period of time. So, and up until 2004, there was a national standard of fire cover for the whole of the country. That was removed in 2004 with the new Fire Services Act, and local fire authorities had to put in place their own standards. Standard was put in place in Northamptonshire in 2007, which was a standard that was supposed to be grown into, I suppose is the best way to say it. The service wasn't achieving the standard when it put it in place back in 2007. And it was at a time we were in a different place nationally, effectively, lots and lots of investment going into things like the fire service, and the idea would have been to grow the service to meet that particular standard. Come 2010, austerity then sort of kicked in, and then we've had the situation that we've had since then. And one of the things that we've had, and you'll notice that we've suggested a new standard in the RMP, moving from an 8-minute standard to a 10-minute standard. And that's largely due to the fact that in constant inspections that the service has had, we've been criticised for having a standard that we actually know is not achievable. And what they're saying is and even more so now, where we're precepted as a separate authority, if you're going to ask the public for money, you've got to tell them what they can expect. And I've never felt comfortable, certainly in the last 5 or 6 years, of saying to the public, you're going to receive a fire engine in 8 minutes. Sometimes they will receive a fire engine in 8 minutes, depending on how far away they are. But essentially, around the county on average, they won't receive a fire engine in 8 minutes. It is more like 10 minutes. And so therefore, we felt by changing the standards, in line with other similar sized counties as well, first of all gives us an ability to compare with other like services, but also tells the people in Northamptonshire, this is what you can expect for your money. If obviously we want to decrease that standard and go back to an 8 minute standard, a 5 minute standard, what we can then start to work out, well, how much is potentially that going to cost? And then we can start to have some of those discussions. And so, you know, that's generally why response standards have reduced and why we've put the response standard we have.
Okay. Can I just ask one supplementary,
Probably just
please?
can I just add a comment to that, because there is 2 parts to that as well. One, and as part of this, you know, about pump. There's 2 big decisions in here. One is about minimum availability of pump, and the other one is in terms of response times. And I felt, you know, as you can see, on the average, we're kind of currently kind of over it. I wanted to make sure that both we're truthful and we also set a realistic target, which is why it countenanced the move. But it is also worth bearing in mind, this isn't just 10 minutes from the time that they leave the station. This is the time from them taking the call. So that because actually in some respects, I could have been a bit slippery if you'd have won. We could have gone, well, I tell you what, we'll keep it at 8 minutes, but we'll just change the definition and we'll not make it about things. So actually, I felt as part of this, you know, we won awards for transparency and honesty. Let's be up front and say it's about 10 minutes. Do we wish it was less? Yes. Do we want to talk more about some of the things we're going to now in terms of that? Yeah, well, we work on trying to move it down. Absolutely. But the first thing we better do is let's at least get it back under 10 minutes. And I think that's quite important. But that is from the receipt of the call.
Yeah. Sorry, and just with regard to that, in your world, is there anything magic about 8 minutes? Or was it just, I'm sure it wasn't plucked out of the air, so is there something magic about the 8 minute, getting there in 8 minutes?
It was, I mean, to be honest, it was before my time in Northamptonshire, but the 8 minutes was largely based on the ambulance standard at the time. So, previous chief officer put in place the 8 minute standard because that's the standard that the ambulance would put in place for getting to something like a cardiac arrest, effectively, or a life-saving intervention. So, and the idea was at the time is that we would start putting our response information together with the ambulance. And so it wasn't just a fire service standard. It'd be a case of, say it was an RTC, for example, road traffic collision. Whether the ambulance got there first or the fire service got there first, we would take the standard from when the first vehicle got there and intervened. That hasn't happened because there isn't the ability to be able to push that data together effectively. And like I say, in subsequent inspections, that's been picked up with regard to us as if to say, well, actually, you're publishing a standard that you know is not achievable. And what you're doing is actually you're almost creating a perception of failure when actually you're no different from any other significantly rural fire service or any other county service. And so it's about putting a standard in not only that's achievable, but like I say, telling the public what's realistic. But I think the really important thing to do, what we're not telling people to do, we're certainly not telling our firefighters to do, is get there slower. What we're doing is saying to them, get there in the same time as you get there now. You get there, you know, safely and effectively and deal with the job when you get there. So we're not asking people to go slower. We're just measuring it in a different way in order to give a better comparison and to be more transparent effectively.
Okay. Councillor Pritchard next.
In previous conversations we've had with regards to the Commissioner, and I think it was intimated that some of the major appliances that you've got at the moment are, shall we say, vintage, if I can put it that way. I presume there is actually a replacement programme that actually will update it. And secondly, and this is for the Commissioner as well, is that was consideration given that when in fact you set your precepts for the police, that some of that money where you actually went from £12 to £24, why didn't some of that go to the fire service?
I'm going to deal with the last one first, because it's legislative, so there are very strict, and you can understand why, about the passing of money between the two. If you like, and it's not meant as a joke, but if you like, I'm schizophrenic. I am 2 different individuals. I am a fire authority and I'm the police and crime commissioner. We choose to serve them both. You cannot, you know, I can't take, you know, £1 million and go, go on here, Darren, I'll give you some of Nick's money. He's not going to be kind of too impressed. So, but also it stops it kind of both ways. So legislatively, it's not appropriate to do so. And actually, it's kind of a dangerous place also to probably be, even if I could, because actually then you start, you know, genuinely, I'm served by two great chiefs, and actually, I want them to kind of work well together. And actually, the last thing you'd want to do is anything that's going to kind of foster jealousy or kind of anything like that. I mean, you know, I'm sure there'll be squabbling brothers soon enough. But, you know, however, there are things we can do to better serve the public. You know, we've talked about, you know, I use Brackley as an example. You know, you've got, does everyone, I know we've done some, but does everyone actually get the difference between a whole-time firefighter and a retained firefighter? Okay, just for everyone's kind of benefit. Because actually, you know, we've got a retained station in Brackley next to a police, you know, a police base. Well, actually, those can be very easily consolidated, and each gets a better facility. Because at the moment, because it's a retained, there's just the fire engine there. So actually, it would make the building more secure because you've got police going backwards and forwards. It might mean that some expansion of it and the consolidation. You know, you've heard some of you here this morning. The chiefs talked about Corby. Well, actually, not that we've done it yet, but it would make actual sense to build on the Corby fire station site and put some response, if you like, from there, rather than take something else. You know, so actually those are opportunity to consolidate. Now, if anyone knows Toaster, we've got the old normal magistrates, lovely old building, and then, you know, if I might say, a less than desirable fire station a few blocks down, if that makes sense. Wouldn't it make sense with the expansion of there to actually look moved up perhaps towards the A5 to build a new joint base that kind of, now those are, those, if you like, but we have to be very clear about how money is spent wisely, and I can feel Helen's gaze looking at me just even having this conversation, that we talk about how very carefully we kind of spend the
Is that
money.
a proposal for Toaster?
I think actually, without being rude, I think you as a we can't have this conversation. As a district councillor, I had an interest in buying the one. Now we've done it. We're open for discussion on that one if we can facilitate. Oh yes, outside of that. Sorry, you had a second point, but in my enthusiasm for that second one, I forgot your point.
I was just saying, was that a proposal for Toaster?
Yes, no. Well, I think yes, we'll have a conversation on that. But I thought you had another part to a question that's gone out of my head. So capital.
Funds for replacement
and I really
fire.
do feel her gaze, as does probably Darren. We have a set aside capital pocket of money. We are still working through the finite detail of where we should spend that. So actually, should we spend some of it, you know, and perhaps I use Kettering as an example. Kettering Fire Station really needs relocating. It's currently at the end of a road next to a school. I think some of you, the fire engine needs to leave at 3 o'clock to park down the road every day because it's next to a school. You know, and then I think it actually also has a problem on Friday. It's isn't it near a mosque as well? So I thought someone was saying. So actually, also Friday around lunchtime, they also have to leave. So is that any way to run a kind of professional service? Whereas actually, and it's a good example. I own a plot of land next to the Northern Accommodation block that may well be a good site for them to build a station on. So that would be one that still has to be carefully numbered, because if in theory the fire service would need to pay for it to be built on, but you know, if you like, as a police authority, I own the land. So there's some very careful bits we need to do there. But there's some work we really need to do on what that looks like, and unless she's going to tell me we're still just finalising the opening balance out of the final negotiations with the county council, and I don't think we're quite there yet. No, we're not. There's still some bits. So any pressure that county councillors are in there could bring on Ian Burrell to resolve any of those things would be very welcome, if I might ask that.
Okay, Councillor Thurland, you're next. You afterwards.
All right, okay, thank you. I was really pleased to see HMOs on here, because anybody who knows me at planning in Kettering, I'm like a dog with a bone. they are a problem. And the thing that we have to look at is, first and foremost, there should be a reasonable standard of living for these people here. The only person who benefits is the landlord, because they pay one set of council tax, one set of bins. The police have a mantra that when we've got amendments or new builds or new developments, it's designing out, not designing in crime. Do you think it would be a good idea if you came and looked at these, or had notes from the planners, because I've asked this before down at Kettering, they'll tell you I've asked for this. When you can see when a building's turning into a block of flats, especially we in my ward, we have a load of terrace houses, you cannot get an emergency vehicle down those streets. And you can't even get a pushchair down on the path because the cars are parked on the road and then the bins are left out. So I think you could actually do that. The other thing as well is I think the fire brigade can be the eyes and ears for local authorities, because when you're driving up and down, you know by just looking at what's outside those houses, whether HMOs, the types of rubbish, the amount of bins that are there, because they can't just stick to the one bin. And I think that is another way you can help the authorities. If we work together, we're talking about partnership working, and I think we need to get the fire more into local authorities. And also when you see something, if you see that in the planning stage and there's going to be a problem with parking, so you know they're going to be parked on yellow lines, they're going to be parked on corners, so you'll never turn a fire engine round. I could give you 6 streets off the top of my head where that happens. And I really do think, and I'm passionate about this, that we need to get the police and the fire working with the local authorities on HMOs and buildings where we're changing from one house to 2, 3 or 4 flats. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so just cover the HMOs first. I mean, you'll be glad to hear, actually, that the crime prevention design advisors from the police actually work together. Well, they're actually managed by the Fire Service Protection Officer, so they're actually a joint team. So when some of those things come in, they actually are looked at together. And that sort of thing. But so, for example, we would be looking at things like bin stores, for example, because we had, you know, a high spate of things like, you know, wheelie bin fires. So we would be looking at bin stores. I mean, parking is a continual issue, you know, not just on new developments, but actually in even some, you know, in some parts of the towns where streets were just never designed for cars parking on both sides of the street, for example. You're right, you know, bin collection day creates other types of problems and what have you. We've started to do, where we know where we've got specific issues in specific locations, particularly around schools, in mornings and evenings. We've started to do some joint patrols, places like Rothwell with police and fire, because it's not just about the police going down or the PCSA going down trying to move cars. We actually take the fire engine down there at the same time to prove to people that we can't actually get it down the road. And the issues, and it's a common thing that comes into me via parish councillors particularly, or some of the local MPs, particularly around parking and the fact that fire engines wouldn't be able to get down places. We send fire engines out, we do reports back to highways, but obviously we don't have any enforcement powers with regard to parking, but we're always willing to to look at those issues, work in partnership, and then to make recommendations where we can. So you're right, that needs to continue, you know, even more than it does now.
Okay, Mr. Shields.
Darren, I have a question for you, actually. It's regarding the various statistics that is being included. And then, until I read them, I was quite amazed at some of this information. The one I'm looking is the numbers of fatality in dwelling fire by age band. Now, this clearly indicates that the biggest area is 80 and over. Now, you made a point on keeping our community safe and well. Reduce fire and accident in the home, where you say you will be targeting specifically older age group. How would you go about it for, well, avoiding accident? Because, of course, those accidents happen mostly in a kitchen. from what you've indicated, and an age group as well, which I thought, well, 40 to 54, that was quite big. And I was in a meeting in Weight Watchers, and this lady was a black woman, and she had been burned, I mean, the whole of her body, I mean, her arms, her neck, everywhere, in a kitchen with fat, burning in a stove. And she was only 39 years old, and she had the children upstairs, so the children could have been in the kitchen at the time. So what program do you envisage for preventing this kind of accident in that particular age group that you mentioned?
Okay, so with regard to the over 80s, we specifically target that age group, and what we do is work with the NHS, and the NHS provide us with something known as Exeter data. So the Exeter data effectively has all of the details of all of the people in the county over the age of 65, and we can also identify from that whether they are living on their own or whether they're living with a partner. Because what we do know is certainly people over the age of 80, if they're also living on their own, are much more vulnerable, not just from fire and being injured or being killed in the fire, but also much more vulnerable from other types of things, slip, trips and falls, for example, maybe, being burgled, distraction burglary, scams and all that type of stuff. So there's a couple of things we're doing. So we target that age group for home fire safety checks, and the crews and our prevention team will target those people, again, either straight to their front door effectively or via other partner agencies. And then also on top of that, what we've been doing is running a pilot of something called Safe and Well. So rather than just doing a home fire safety check, we would also check for other things as well. So we would give a bit of advice about things like fuel poverty. We would give some advice about things like burglary or crime prevention. We'd give some advice around, alcohol, drugs, depending on who the people are effectively. So again, that's very much working in partnership with the NHS. One of the good things also is, since we've become effectively a separate organisation from the County Council, we've got an independent seat on the Health and Wellbeing Board now. So we're able to represent ourselves on that, which means we can sort of put that offer up front as opposed to being represented by the County Council on that, where maybe, some of the members of the County Council may not have been aware of some of the services that the fire service could offer. So I think being an independent organisation, sitting on things like Health and Wellbeing Board, Community Safety Board, I think it means we can start to push some of those things that we are doing.
Thank you. It's very interesting. Yeah.
And there is a good story. I mean, Darren was just telling me the other day about, during a safe and well check, actually someone had gone through to look in someone's kind of kitchen. The lady had left the back door open, and there was someone trying to burgle her at that moment in time. So it's just an example of actually just that, if you like, that presence that actually can make communities safer as a consequence of that.
I've got a couple.
Give a note on that.
Oh, well.
Just a bit of good news, actually, because any councillor, if you've got a ward surgery or you've got a community place or you do lunches or something, which we have, and Joe will come along and they do, they give talks to anybody. So if you've got something coming up in your ward, get them along, because you'll get loads of people there, because if they're coming to moan at you, they'll come and listen to the fire.
Sorry, Councillor Roy, you're next.
Sharing a microphone. Just in going back to Councillor Pritchard's comments about the capital programme, and he'd asked the question in relation to appliances and vehicles, but the response was very much around hard kind of land assets and that kind of thing. So if it's, firstly, we have to congratulate Stephen on maintaining an approach where there is a capital programme as opposed to not having a capital programme. So, kind of like credit where credit's due. But just take it admirably and like a gentleman. Why not? But just in terms of the vision in relation to the appliances, particularly I serve, as Councillor Strachan does, a Northampton-based division, particularly with high-rise accommodation in it, and in respect of being able to get an adequate response to high-rise kind of fire requirements with the kind of vehicle appliances you have and the mix of vehicle appliances you have. Just also one more issue. I've seen the FBU response to the consultation, and I wondered whether in future kind of documents of this kind, whether it's possible to pick out their responses and integrate it into the consultation report as a whole, rather than just having it as an appendix. So, yeah.
Two parts to that. I'm not sure you meant, I wasn't meaning to, I was being a bit flippant there. We're merely saying that in the end, we need to have a programme. And to be fair, the priority is we would obviously want to maintain our vehicles before our buildings, if you like, because they genuinely kind of have that thing. But for instance, we've got some training facilities, a firehouse, that we can't currently use, so we can't train in that particular area. So some of those things kind of absolutely kind of need to be addressed. I'll let Darren comment on the specificity of but actually the consultation did take account of individual firefighters, and they were incorporated in their own right. The FBU, as in the same way in the police and crime one from Fed or anyone else who wants to kind of give a submission, we gave, if you like, extra consideration to it, and that's why it was kind of attached as appendix, and it kind of informed our thinking.
Okay, so specifically with regard to the capital requirement for vehicles and equipment. So we had a lifing policy for all appliances that was 12 years. That was extended to 15 years, and that was really more based on the fact that modern appliances are better technology effectively, so we could stretch that to 15 years. We've got vehicles now on the road that are 18 years old, so we know they're 3 years beyond our own lifing policy, and that's because we had a capital plan that was lodged with the county at the time, but it was an unfunded capital plan. What we'd previously done is funded all of our capital vehicle requirement via something called capital distribution grant that had come direct from central government. When that dried up in about 2012, there was no replacement money in order to move that capital programme on. So therefore, what we've done is then fallen behind with regard to the replacement vehicle strategy. But what we do know is what vehicles we'll want to place over what period of time. However, what we've got to do is we're working with Helen, the Section 151 officer, to work out what that capital requirement looks like over, say, a 5 to 8 year period, and then potentially we would have to borrow some money in order to be able to do that. That has to be repaid, so that would then have to work out what the revenue requirement was for servicing the capital need. So we're working on that. So we're refining the capital plan, I suppose. But certainly, I would want to replace all of the fire appliances that are on our full-time fire stations, i.e. the ones that get used most, and that would be for yourselves the ones in Northampton. With regard to aerial appliances, so high-reach appliances, we have 2 vehicles in the fleet, one at Moulton and then another at Corby, that are combined appliances. They're a fire appliance and they're a high-reach appliance in one. My opinion on that is that we wouldn't want to replace those on a like-for-like basis. In a post-sort of Grenfell environment, as we're now in, all services across the country are starting to look at their high-rise risk and think about those things slightly differently. So my view would be we would want to replace those 2 combined aerial rescue pumps with a fire engine and a separate high-reach appliance. Obviously, high-reach appliances are expensive. They're sort of £750,000 upwards. And so what we need to do is work that potentially into the capital plan. That's on top of, again, we've got a lifing policy for all of our equipment, so fire engines are full of equipment, and we know when every piece of equipment requires to be replaced. And again, so that's the piece of work we're doing with Helen, so we can make sure that we replace the equipment as and when it needs to be changed. One thing I will say, and it is worth mentioning this, is that the last capital or new capital investment we had from the county just as we transitioned was for new RTC equipment for about a third of the appliances. So that was bought and that was put on the run effectively. We would still like to be able to invest in changing the RTC equipment for all the other appliances, for example. So again, things like that would go into the capital plan. But then you look at things like ICT would need renewing and things like the property as well. So I would say we've got a very wide capital requirement needed across the service. It's working with Helen then to prioritise that in order that we can ensure that we do the right things first, and then we do all the sort of nice to do's after that.
And that kind of is the challenge. That's also why you haven't been at previous ones when I talked kind of the additionality around kind of purple. How can we be more efficient and deliver a better service by bringing our vehicle maintenance for the two organisations together? Actually, can the shared resources of kind of ICT, HR, allow us to kind of find efficiencies? And I don't think, by the way, I don't actually think there's great savings there, but there might be some efficiencies there that actually might then enable, if you like, the front line to be more efficient, that then frees up their kind of time. But we're not in a situation where we're kind of kids in a candy store. There was no reserves that were kind of transferred kind of out the gate, but also blissfully no debt either. And so actually how we work well with combining the estate, we've got to be innovative to kind of do that. But the good news is, of course, is that any council tax precept that's now raised for fire, take my point, will be spent on fire. And if there are some opportunities, if some buildings are being shared, to take your point earlier, if the police are using a site and they're saving money for themselves, it only seems appropriate at the highest level that they share some of that benefit across the service. And those things, I think, will work themselves out. But those are, then again, in using Darren's terminology, they're not nice to do, if you like. There is a genuine requirement to make sure that the money that the public gives us is spent in the most efficient way possible and gives us the best service. Now, these are emergency services, and so you need to do it with care. And it's no accident, and a lot of work has been gone on to make sure that these two plans arrive at this point. And you'll notice the similarities, well, the actual standard piece at the back about kind of collaboration and working together to make sure that's kind of explicit on all, so we can look for these things to make sure that we can deliver. Because actually, it is a thin red line. And is it one that kind of makes me feel, oh, we're completely on top of that? 14 pumps, we set it as the minimum. It's not ideal. We would prefer it to be much more around the 17 or 18, and that's absolutely got to be our ambition. But I think it was very important out the gate for us to set a marker that says we can't go below this, and right now inventively what can we do to improve that situation. So it very much is it's not a sexy strategy to come with. It's about stabilisation and making sure that we're viable in the future. One of the things that's also quite a shock to me, when you actually look at it, Northamptonshire is now the second worst funded service in the country. Yeah. So right. It is worth in terms of benchmarking it.
I think I've got Andre next.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just coming on to another area, which is that page 42 of 62 within the report gives some indications of the way that our station's demands effectively are called upon throughout the county, and I'm very pleased, obviously, as a county fire and rescue service, it stays a county fire and rescue service, and clearly as a protagonist supporter of the transformational position where the fire service is in terms of governance arrangements. It gives it security for longer term and takes out the public pound of the county council competition. In that environment of where those demands are, as we are 75% rural effectively within our communities, we can absolutely see where the demands have been, but quite clearly we must remember, and this is something that perhaps requires a bit of qualification to this picture, and it's an interesting diagram, is that we are and have always been a dynamic resourcing service. So therefore, we would not say, well, we'll withdraw everything in fire cover from Desborough, Arundel, Brixworth, Ethenborough and Woodford Holes because they hardly ever get called. and instead invest it into Kettering, Wellingborough and Mereway, effectively as prime examples there. There are, we know, the areas of sleeping risk and the areas of community risk that clearly at the end of the day have abilities and have residual risks there for the future, so we have to be mindful of that. In terms, and quite clearly this is the crucial piece, we are, as a rural community, unable to guarantee through whole time and retained that every station will be on the run all the time. And the only way to do that would be to ensure that every single station we had was a whole-time station and had more than one pump and more than one set of crew, because even at Mereway, you still cannot guarantee that there will always be a crew available and it will always be covering that area. And that's one thing that we're all absolutely aware operationally, and certainly from a county council perspective, I was always and have always stood by the fact that even at a whole-time station, we cannot guarantee that there will be cover there. So we have to be quite cognizant of the fact that communities shouldn't be overly dependent, effectively, and shouldn't overly rely upon that being a station will always have cover. It is something as a fire plan needs to evolve the way our communities evolve. With the new developments that were coming on stream, and I think it's 26,000, I think, at the north of the county, and certainly so many more thousands of properties all around the county, Madam Chairman, we absolutely have to bear in mind that the growth of the community that we have around us, and prime example, Priors Hall, that we don't have sufficient stations, we don't have sufficient coverage in the plan currently. This is a layout that we have had for a long time in the community of Northamptonshire, and I think irrespective of how government treats it geographically, numbers of councils, whatever, we need to be looking to the future and understanding how that dynamic modelling has a responsibility and what that plan is for the future, because current locations and layouts are one thing, tackling the growth of the community is one other big challenge. I'd like just to put two more little points in there. One is, in terms of the capital plan, innovation is absolutely critical, and I absolutely follow Chief Darren's point there, which is obviously we'll replace vehicles and equipment where possible, but we've also been at the forefront of leading on technology, which is tremendous, because the number one factor we want to do, other than keeping our community safe, is keep our firefighters safe. That is absolutely critical. We do not want to commend any firefighter to any incident without having had the appropriate equipment available to them. The other is the arson task force, a very small team. Sounds like an amazing SWAT team with 300 million people. But they have achieved brilliantly, and I know Darren knows that, and we all do too. And one thing that overlaps with the police on this is that domestic violence, FGM, all sorts of issues in communities, they have been phenomenal. And the evidence has been there in terms of what they have managed to achieve. So I would very much encourage that there was support given in future plans and current plans to enable them to continue to do the good work. And that really does mean that they are unbelievably flexible and responsive in the same way that a huge team would be. They are just able to nimbly get into something and prevent incidents very quickly, whether it creates safe houses or stopping people being deported from this country into modern slavery, etc. They have been there at the forefront of that, and there is evidence to say that they are a highly effective resource that needs good support and further investment. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
I can just make a comment that when we first knew that we were going to have the likelihood of the fire, we did contemplate whether we needed to bring in people that had fire expertise, and we said we won't jump to that, we will just see how things go. But obviously Councillor Gonzalez de Savage has many years of experience in that field, so it's useful to hear things from a point of view of somebody that knows a lot of the challenges that you face.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As does Councillor Strachan as well, who's not with us today. I suppose I was quite a lot in what you said there. There's 2 points. In all of the, you've got the strategic plan and then the IRMP. It is kind of worth highlighting that I think the the team felt more confident that they could do an integrated risk management plan, which genuinely is reflective of the risk, rather than trying to kind of down manage the perception of that risk against the kind of strategic availability of money. And I suppose I want to provide some kind of reassurance. You know, there is no plan for some wholesale, and I'm sure that's not what you're saying, but I just want to be reassuring that, you know, looking at, I think the graph you're talking about, is that figure 35 or something on page 42, yeah, which you could easily take to imply that actually not a lot goes on in a certain number of stations, and actually would we consider thinking. That's not the case, but also it is worth that difference, you know, probably even more so than me, that actually that's why they are retained stations as opposed to kind of whole time stations. So there's no desire for a mass closing or any form of significant closing in terms of fire stations. We will unreservedly look at options to consolidate, and I'm using it as a bad example, but you know, you've got Brackley and Toaster. Should you move it to Silverstone? I'm deliberately picking it as one because I know we wouldn't do that one. But you know, you've got Rothwell and Desborough. Actually, there's probably a good case why we should be looking at those sorts of ones. So actually, to make sure that not only is the location right, but retained availability of kind of staff is in there. But I know and I want to provide some kind of reassurance as well around kind of innovation. We will continually look to kind of innovate, and so as you know, sometimes you need a little bit of cash to innovate, and hopefully we're able to prize the money out of someone's fingers over there, Darren, for a bit of innovation, but obviously in a sustainable and kind of forthright way. I don't know if Darren, if you've got any comment you want to make to that, Madam Chairman.
I mean, so just on the growth thing, I mean, obviously we take account of the growth in the county, but it'd be fair to say that there isn't a direct correlation between growth and numbers of incidents. The county's been growing for the last 15, 20 years, and fire incidents have been going down. You know, however, they have levelled off, and we expect them, you know, as they have nationally, to start going up slightly effectively. So there's lots of other societal sort of factors in that, and actually the point that was made earlier about trying to design out a lot of risk at the outset, I think has been one of those things that we can look at. I mean, the stations that we've currently got are generally built where they're built because historically that's where they've been built. They're not necessarily in the wrong places with regard to, because they're in the urban areas, and you'll get more fires in urban areas because there's more people and there's more houses in that. But you still will get some fires in rural areas as well. So it's about looking at where you locate your stations, really. So maybe taking them out of, using the Kettering as the example, taking them out of the town and putting them on a road network effectively to give you better access. They're putting them around the road infrastructure. So they're the types of things that we would look at. We'll also then start to look at the mix of stations, and certainly from my perspective, as a lot of you will know, one of our real pressures is trying to get enough retained appliances on the run during the daytime, because retained people have other jobs and therefore they're not close to their retained station, so that's become a real challenge. And it may well be in places like the south of the county, where we have 3 retained stations, that we struggle to get on the run sometimes. Rather than sending a fire engine from Northampton into the south of the county, we would look potentially to do something different in the south of the county that may ease some of that pressure. So it's about using the different duty systems, the locations of the stations, in order to design a fire service that meets the sort of the future needs of the county effectively. I mean, I'm as keen as anybody not just to replace exactly what we've got just because of what we've got it, because that was the fire service for the 1970s effectively. So we really need to look at what the fire service is going to look like, you know, in the 2020s up to 2030. Andre's right about innovation. Obviously, we've been at the forefront of innovation with things like Cobra, and yeah, new vehicles that we would want to further invest in that. And just a word on the arson task force, the ATF, and it is a live discussion actually that we're having with the force at the moment. For those of you that know the ATF, both of the individuals in that are getting close to retirement, I would say beyond retirement and more, to be honest with you, and they've done a fantastic job over the years. We've got a succession plan for our person, but we're having a talk through the interoperability board with the police about, okay, well, what do the arson task force need to do going forward, and again, what other things can they be linking into? So we've certainly got a plan to, you know, to continue with the good work that they've done. That just needs to be bottomed out properly with the force around how that's going to be funded going forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Pritchard next.
With regards to the background document, there's an error on page 77 with regards to the consultation and the rail freight terminal. It has not been granted. In fact, it actually is going to go to the Secretary of State on the 9th of April, and it will take at least 6 months to actually be determined, because it's classified as a strategic infrastructure project. So, and also, you haven't also mentioned the one at 15A that is also up for approval, which is called the Central Gateway, and that is even larger than the Northampton Gateway. So when you look at that sort of scenario, each one of those is going to probably generate at least 21,000 vehicle movements per day, plus employing something like 14,000 people. So it's a major, major project.
Is that in the IRMP, or is that
Background.
Yes,
Yeah.
background 16 of 62.
In fact, there is also mention of Russian Diamonds Football Club, which doesn't exist anymore.
You'd say it's dynamic, didn't you?
Also, if I may mention, I was very, very impressed with the service vehicle, the integrated service vehicle that we saw during the last visit. Phenomenal piece of equipment, it really was. And very lastly, just another thing actually, with regards to Councillor Thurland, something I heard on the news the other day, which was actually said by one of the councillors from Northampton Borough, is that there are 900 licensed HMOs in Northampton, plus they reckon another 1,000 that are not licensed. So I think it gives you an indication of, you know, yeah. And it gives you an indication of the potential hazards. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, and that was just a little bit of...
That is interesting, because HIMO is actually, you know, if you do some correlation between that and some antisocial behaviour or something, that there is a kind of a correlation, so that kind of sharing of data is very, very valid. Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Shields has had a burning question for some while.
Oh, yes. Darren, I was just going to ask you, is to do with the NVRS Extensive Capital Programme. Now that you're standing as an independent, have you considered perhaps funding stream? Add a funding stream to for your capital programme particularly?
Fox me for a minute. I thought she had some information that we didn't for a minute.
No, there's a crisis going on with our multi-pool shared services and it not taking our payroll, not incorporating our overtime, with someone's flashing with your approval. I feel like no, so it's all right. Yeah.
So just with regard to the capital programmes, there's a couple of things with regard to that. I mean, apart from you know, working out what we need on a replacement basis, one of the things that we sometimes can do, and actually you mentioned the joint vehicle, I mean, the capital for that was supplied by Transformation Grant, so we specifically made a bid to central government for something that hadn't been done before. So certainly that is always something that we would look to do. So whether that's with the police or whether that's with other partners, because, you know, like that vehicle, for example, we probably wouldn't have a requirement for a vehicle like that ourselves. The police similarly probably wouldn't. None of us probably could have been able to afford to have bought it. We knew that the one that we had before was coming to the end of its life. So yeah, we would certainly always look at other ways to be able to bring investment into the county by looking at transformation bids for various different things. We also have a sort of a very embryonic commercial sort of piece of work that we got going on. I mean, we've had a discussion about how we can potentially grow that. We're a relatively small service, so again, we would probably need to put some resource into that in order to be able to grow it. But there's potential there to bring in, I would say, a limited amount of capital. I don't think we're ever going to be able to sort of fund all of our fire service replacement fire engine replacement program with it. But it again might be able to drip some money into the service that will be useful for other things potentially.
Yeah. One question I had is that we talked about partnership working a lot, but presumably you work very closely with the emergency planning people. I know certainly when I've been involved in emergency planning many years ago, when the scenarios set up with police, fire, emergency planning, and we've actually had two instances in in Rushden, where we've had mass evacuations, sometimes just from worry about gas canisters or something like that, and I wasn't able to get into my house on one occasion. But, you know, we haven't sort of seen that in there, but I'm very impressed with the amount of work you do other than the fire, because obviously everyone knows you putting out fires, but the RTCs that you have to deal with obviously the as we said, extra traffic on the roads and growing, and the fact that we're a logistics hub here with lots of HGVs, but also all the other types of things you do, and particularly the co-responding as well. And have you found that is there any correlation with that, with the ambulance service and you know, perhaps lesser response that is available there?
So, specifically on co-responding, what we've been doing, since 2005 actually, one of the first services to do co-responding nationally over at Long Buckby and Guilsborough. And then we expanded that through the sort of between 2012, 2016. And at the height of that, a couple of years ago, we were doing around 2,500 co-responding calls per year. That was being done on a voluntary basis and specifically in the rural parts of the county from some of those retained stations. What's happened since then is in 2017, the ambulance service changed the way that they mobilise to different types of incidents. So actually they pass far less incidents to us now. So this year we'll probably only respond to about 500 co-responding calls. So there are 2,000 that we did respond to that we're not responding to. Now that's either because they're passing them to community first responders, and there's been a growth in those. Or potentially, rather than sending a fire service response, they're sending a double crewed ambulance effectively, because the call comes in that the person requires to be taken to hospital. So the way they've changed their mobilising models then impacted on the amount of calls that we go to. But we want to continue with co-responding. I think one of the things about the sort of the breadth of work that we're involved in, and you're right to identify the fact that, you know, when I joined 30 years ago, it was predominantly going to fires. There was a few RTCs, and now it's water rescues, animal rescues, you know, hazmat incidents, RTCs, as many RTCs as we are fires, and anything else that, if you know, we always say if people don't know who to ring, they generally ring the fire brigade effectively, and then we'll go out and have a look. But what that means is really that, you know, the job of the firefighter hasn't, or sort of things like the terms and conditions and pay rate hasn't really kept up with what a firefighter's job is. And there's a national negotiation going on at the moment between the unions and the employers around that whole thing about, well, what do we want a firefighter to do going forward? Do we want them to continue to do all these things on the prevention agenda, for example, things like co-responding? What does that look like? And if it looks like we want people to do all of those things, what does pay look like? What does terms and conditions look like? So all of those things then start to impact on the funding formula going forward and the comprehensive spending review going forward, because, you know, if we're going to start paying people more to do more things, then we're going to need more money in order to be able to pay them and do more things effectively. So again, very much what we do locally is very much linked into what's going on nationally with regard to those type of things. And I mean, Nick heard that, you know, the Policing and Fire Minister has said to Fire nationally, you know, you need to make a case for better funding going forward as part of the comprehensive spending review. And so, coming back to the earlier question about, you know, could I add some of Nick Adderley's money? Yes, please. But he's not going to give me any, and quite rightly so. What we want to actually do is lobby government so we can get the same type of precept flexibility that the police have had, because our precept flexibility is linked very much to the same as local authorities, and we think it should be different because we've got different demands effectively. So again, that's one of the things that we're lobbying as a sector, and locally we'll be involved in doing that, because actually that's a way potentially to be able to widen out some of those things that we do.
It's just a point really around that kind of innovation I've mentioned kind of whole time, because they were kind of the rural areas that were contributing. They were, for the most part, a lot of them were retained doing it. Now actually, because that was extra work they were doing, it meant being available for retained was more worthwhile. So actually that's a good example of actually sometime that innovative thing, it actually meant that more pumps are going to be available. So actually by that person making making themselves available for that, they're also available to deploy the pump, which is why we've got to think innovatively. Yes, it's very easy or easier with your whole time and you know where you are. You pay them, they're there and or they're available. But actually that retained, it's not quite as simple. So actually, if you pay them to do safe and well checks or home safety checks, and then they're actually available, then they're in that community, take the fire engine, then you actually may have great availability, which then, of course, a consequence of that brings down your response time. So it's kind of, if I might describe it, it's kind of a complex 3D jigsaw that, you know, particularly for someone like me who's kind of new to it, it's taking time to just kind of get your head around how innovatively you can do some of those things.
And the other thing that I just wanted to throw out there is obviously there are things come out of Grenfell and possibly may, you know, be changes in legislation, things like that. And one, you know, the prevention is very, obviously, dear to our hearts. And one of the things that I'm interested in is things like the sprinklers, particularly in schools and in care homes, and particularly in new ones as they're built, rather than, you know, the ones, you know, trying to retrofit it into existing ones, which would be obviously perhaps a bit more expensive. But I just wondered if you'd like to make a comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, sprinklers are massively important, particularly in a county like ours. So they're in a number of different buildings. Like you say, we've got to build 30-odd new schools, and if you're going to build a new school, then put sprinklers in it, almost certainly, because the impact of losing a school is a massive community impact, effectively, if you have a serious fire in a school. We have lots of big warehouse-type buildings in the county, like you say, because we're very much a logistics-type county. Though, as you would have seen, you know, a year ago or so, a large fire at Daventry in a very large, what we call uncompartmented building, so no compartments in the building. It was effectively full of wood because it was storing wood and things. And if a fire catches hold in one of those buildings, we have very, very little chance of being able to put the fire out. In fact, the buildings collapse so quickly that actually by the time we get there, if it's seriously a serious fire, we wouldn't even want to deploy people into the building to put it out, to be honest with you, because we know it's going to collapse pretty quickly. Putting sprinklers in buildings like that at planning stage, like you say, at very, very early doors, means that those fires generally will be put out before we get anywhere near them, you know. And so I would absolutely ask for your help and support for sprinklers in lots and lots of buildings around the county, high-rise buildings, things like HMOs. I mean, certainly when we build things like new flats, even if they're not high-rise flats, actually, putting domestic type sprinklers in some of those buildings, again, can put out a fire in a living room or kitchen. And it means that, you know, not only the person survives, but all of their things survive as well, effectively. So, yeah, sprinklers is one of those things that we would want to, you know, increase the campaigning for across the county.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, and we would ask for the panel's support on that. And actually, ironically, me and you have both had a discussion about a school that's being built and making sure that they're included in it. Because actually, it's done at the point that they're being built. It's a relatively small cost, and seems absurd that we would kind of go ahead on that, not go ahead on that. But I also, you make a really good point there, particularly around protection. Actually, you know, the protection and the risk-based inspections that the service needs to do. Actually, we're not certain what obligations are going to come out of Grenfell, and whilst we don't have the volume of high-rises you'll find in London, you've just heard some of the numbers around HMOs. So actually, you know, ironically, that's an area of expansion or pressure in terms of a team that's going to need to be addressed as we kind of move strategically. So when we have this kind of conversation about pumps, I suppose I just want to emphasise the point. You know, we've had the police discussion quite often is all about how many cops have you got, and this is about how many firefighters and pumps you've got, and there is an analogy between the two. But sometimes it's not just as simple as that you know, the cybercrime and, if you like, inspection are those kind of analogies I sort of draw between and draw everyone's attention to. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Sorry, I think Mr. McAfee, you had a question. Sorry.
Just a quick one. Obviously, a lot of very useful and informative data was done in this pack here. So, question for the Commissioner: have you had the opportunity now to form an opinion on the adequacy of the performance metrics that are in place for the fire service, and if so, what is that opinion?
funny enough, we actually had our performance review this week as we get through and kind of understand the kind of metrics. It's important to kind of understand some of the elements I've mentioned there. You have got kind of, and I use my example of, if we spend money supporting the ambulance services, push-ups availability, it actually also pushes up in terms of the pump. The real bit that we're looking at was we are both working through the minimum standards that we set, which were around kind of 10 minutes and the 14 pump minimum, and actually how do we more like, if you like, that's where we're in the we're not quite in the red, we're in the amber, and we need to be up to 18 in terms of green. So there are a number of things that we're working our way through to make sure that we deliver it. I would say we haven't got it locked down as nicely as we would yet. It's very much about setting minimums and achievement above that. But actually there's some strategic thinking that we've been doing, if you like, but it is also complicated. I would say that, and a member from the FBU is in the room, so won't mind me saying it. We need to make sure it's done in conjunction with our partners. The Chief Constable has a lot more power over a warranted officer. He can tell him to do what the hell he wants. To be blunt with you, you can't. There's a role model for a roadmap for the fire service that needs to be adhered to and managed, and there is some negotiation that's going on nationally at that, and that has a profound impact on performance, if you like.
So if I've got that correctly, it sounds like the performance metrics are there. The debate is more around the standard that you aim for. Would that be it?
Yeah, that's a fair comment.
Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any more comments on this? Shall we try to round up if James would like to, because we have to do the same sort of thing as we did with the police and crime plan.
Thank you, Chair. So I think there have been a number of areas highlighted through the discussion. So the importance of the capital programme going forward, for example, issues around prevention and whether that relates to dealing effectively with issues around HMOs, or the point about putting in sprinklers in new and existing buildings as far as possible. I think what would be useful to have would be some clarity from the panel in the sense of is it highlighting those as areas that it is satisfied the police and crime, the fire and rescue plan deals with adequately? Is it highlighting those as areas it thinks need to be brought into the plan more, or is it basically satisfied with the overall direction that represented by the fire and rescue plan, and but it highlights those as areas that it wants the Commissioner to be working towards addressing in the future? I think I'm looking for some clarification, more of a steer from the panel as to what you wish to say beyond highlighting those areas. You don't necessarily need to say any more, but some clarity would be useful.
Did you have a point?
Well, Madam Chair, I think just picking up that point, I think from James, we obviously do need to have an awareness of the excellent work that's happening, and the plans here are very clear, and it is a matter of, I think, of revisiting that and having an update as to how the plans go throughout the year. I think that would be the most wise way to achieve that. We used to have regular consultations on this in the County Council, and I'm absolutely positively sure that as a county authority, through both the Commissioner and the Chief Fire Officer, that we'll have that update available to us, and I'll bring it back to the meeting, say, in 3 months' time, and have that regular awareness.
So, if I could, Chair, essentially the panel is supportive of the fire and rescue plan and the direction it represents. It's highlighted a number of areas of issues of that it needs to think of potential concern, and it looks forward to seeing that those are addressed as part of future work.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, Chair, but the concern is a bit Strong?
I think you're right, Councillor. I disagreed with that as I was saying it myself.
Yeah. All right, okay. Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting to see any new developments and things that are happening.
I think
an update.
Yeah,
Yes.
update. I think that we all agree the plan was, most of the questions actually were for clarity and understanding and what was being said that I found, and some on where we were going with it, and I was thought that was very impressive. I think it's just about we're happy with it, and we look forward to seeing how it's implemented through the year.
Leslie.
Madam Chairman, I think the working, I think the encouragement and to continue the partnership working, and I really would like to see a closer working somewhere with local authorities on planning and HMOs, or at least to continue what we're doing. Thank you.
Yeah. And also I think we're interested in any of the purple working, the collaborations and the rationalisation of any properties and things like that, that as they come forth as time goes on.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Obviously, we intend to, in the same way we report from a policing point of view, we'll kind of bring forth updates each one in terms of significant developments, how we're managing in terms of performance and some of those strategic challenges we've got, and we'll bring those forth.
Chair, did the panel also want to take up the Commissioner's invitation to express its support around sprinklers?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah. If I may be stronger than that, Madam. If I may be stronger than that, Madam Chairman, I think that we've always had a very strong view about preventative measures that can be taken with some public spend issues in terms of new school buildings, hospitals, care homes, wherever they are. There are different legislative areas depending on what those buildings are. Schools currently in the BB 100 and other planning guidelines and building regulations do not stipulate they have to have sprinklers. I think we should push back hard and say, actually, it is in the interest of everyone that they do incorporate sprinklers. And we've spoken about this very, very widely. It's a cross-political, apolitical, national interest issue here that we all know. I mean, whether you live in Scotland, Wales or England, those three areas completely divide themselves in terms of new properties in Wales have to have, this is residential, have to have sprinklers fitted, and Scotland too. And in England isn't the case. So we have a complete imbalance in terms of where the sprinkler policy, if there is one, actually applies. And I'm absolutely sure that if we had a safer community, everyone benefits. And it's not just the environment factor about using the water and the multi-millions of gallons that every time is used on incident, but it absolutely clearly states business continuity is not a problem if there's a sprinkler head that goes off and puts out one fire, rather than having the old mission that people always thought we'd flood an entire building if there was one little fire somewhere. That's not the case. It's never been the case. And I know that Darren will testify to the fact that he'd be much more reassured if an incident was attended by a fire crew just to switch off a sprinkler as opposed to go out and try and put the fire out and damage thereafter.
Just a general point, actually. If I may say, and this is just a personal opinion, I'm very impressed with regards to the co-working of the police authority and also the fire authority under the guise of the Commissioner. I think it's working extremely well, what I've seen so far, and it's one of these things perhaps we should have done it 2 or 3 years ago.
Yes, well, I think, we all applaud that. Yeah.
Just quickly on the sprinkler point, so sounds like there's consensus here, but what's the tools or actions for actually taking that forward?
I think perhaps we need to, have perhaps a discussion with Darren on that, because I know certainly, there's a new school being built in my division, and when I asked about sprinklers, they went, no, it's not in the specification from the body that does it. So. Yeah.
If I can just add something, I actually sit on the planning committee, so in my particular district, and these things come up, and there is no legislation and no requirement for any of the developers to put sprinkler systems into any location.
I think it's higher up than we are, but we could perhaps
it's a national requirement.
We could perhaps put some pressure on.
I think we're talking about lobbying and about raising the issue.
Yeah, because I'm sure Darren appreciates our moral support, but he would prefer something practical as well.
I think just the fact that we will mention it in this report begins to add to that political lobbying, and then it's really for us to take it not only to our own sovereign councils, but also to take it up with our MPs. And you, as well as a member of the public, can take it up with an MP, with your role here. It's about lobbying and trying to change.
So if we can just back to the, you know, we're putting in the comments, if we add a comment into the report, everyone will be happy with that. Stephen, you just want to...
Madam Chairman, what we'll do is we're taking this and we'll write to government anyway on in terms of standards, but actually, you know, there's not just the legislation, actually it's that lobbying for the moral authority, and actually, you know, if you're building a school, forget all of that. It's just a sensible thing to do on the basis that you won't lose that school. If you lose that school, the community impact is huge.
Absolutely.
So actually, you know, for a relatively modest amount of money, you know, can have a significant impact. So, you know, I encourage where anyone's involved in planning, they might not be able to do it, but actually it's an advisement to say we are, and actually we condone you for not doing this or something would be very beneficial, particularly those councillors around the room.
We'll put that in the report. Are you happy to also delegate authority to Chair and Vice Chair to do the final wording? Yep. Okay. All right, so we move on. Okay, we move on to the Police, Fire and Crime Panel Rules of Procedure. Thank you very much. I mean, mostly it's, I'm sure James will concur, mostly it's just adding the word fire in, you know, where it's needed. I have noticed, James, at 7.1 we've got one missed.
Are you, James?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. And also at 10.2, with I was saying about the special functions, and that really only covers the policing ones. I think we need to incorporate the fire ones in there. So if everyone's happy, you know, with it generally, no other ones that anyone's found that I've missed, or I think they were the only two areas. James, do you want to...
No, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I mean, it is worth highlighting that the way police, the and fire element of police, fire and crime panels' responsibilities has been implemented, perhaps typically of the approach in this country, is to basically extend the existing powers to the equivalents for fire. So the police and crime plan and the fire and rescue plan, the annual report and the annual fire and rescue statement, and clearly two precepts now. So in a typical way, as I say, there's not an introduction of a whole lot of new provisions. It's the extension of existing provisions. So these are very much changes intended to conform to that.
Okay. So everyone happy with that? We'll move on to the work programme. Did you want to deal with that, James?
So yeah, this is it presents the work programme for the current year at the Appendix 1, but also as this is the final panel meeting for the current year, there's the opportunity for the panel to take stock and to either highlight anything it thinks it wishes to identify as a potential future topic for scrutiny, or indeed anything it wishes to say about future working methods or the approach adopted by the panel. The caveat to that is that the new panel, in inverted commas, appointed for 1920 is not obligated to take any suggestions from the existing panel without considering and deciding whether it agrees them. But equally, it's useful for the work of the new panel to be informed by what the old panel has done and any conclusions it draws from that. So anything that the current panel wishes to highlight in terms of potential future scrutiny work or potential future working methods will be brought to the attention of the panel at the first meeting in 1920. Clearly, we hope that there's a deal of continuity in the membership of the panel, so that the existing expertise isn't lost. So in that respect, hopefully the new panel and the old panel will be fairly close to each other. as I say, it's an opportunity to highlight anything relating to future scrutiny topics or future working methods that the panel wishes to raise at this point.
Has anyone got any specific points on the programme? Obviously, there will be, I'm not sure it'll be this year or during the next year, but there are, obviously with unitary coming along, there will likely be changes of membership. You know, but I think we're not in a position to look at that internally because we don't know enough about what's going to happen.
I think it's worth highlighting as well, Chair, that clearly the panel is at a very early stage of getting to grips with its new and fire responsibilities. I'm absolutely sure it will continue to gain experience and to take any learning that arises from that. So you don't need to feel that, that there's an onus on you to come up with a definitive answer for what the future should look like at this meeting, because we're still gaining experience of the new elements of the role.
I think Stephen wanted to come in with something.
It's just a small point, and this seemed an appropriate point to kind of introduce it. Currently, you know, James and the monitoring officer are kindly provided by the county council, and you know, has thought been given to what that might look like in a new unitary authority. Will there be one of them that is a host, whether that be kind of the north and or west? I don't know. I'm merely asking it out there. You know, thank you for the work that you kindly do as part of it, but I'm just throwing it out there that at some point there needs to be that if you like, the functionality of it needs to be thought about, hosted and or managed. It might be simple. People might go, it's the west. Maybe the north would like to fight them for it. I don't know, but but you know what I mean. It needs to be somewhere, and but it's the sort of simple thing that I can imagine is not having attended the chief execs and leaders meeting. It's not on anybody's agenda, so I'm merely throwing it out there.
I imagine it's quite a long way down the.
Yes, and I understand why, but it's.
Yeah, I think perhaps we just need to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, but I think, Chair, a number of us are on the joint committees and we'll be on that shadow body, and we certainly, those of us that we will think of it.
Yeah, Andre.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a point really on the membership of the committee. I think that the panel, we should perhaps give some thought about including a representative from the FBU, I think, in terms of an effective representation for the new responsibility. I know Mark is obviously with us at the moment. Clearly it would be quite useful, I think, from a perspective of that makeup, and your advice obviously on that, James, but I think it would be quite informative and useful to have that.
We'll have to take advice on that.
Yeah. I think the approach that the panel has taken, which you alluded to earlier in the meeting, Chair, about the extension of its responsibilities and whether it needed to make additional co-options, for example, to address that, was that it didn't, on the basis that the panel should aim to be scrutiny experts rather than subject matter experts. Clearly, it benefits from Councillor Gonzalez de Savage, Councillor Strachan, who with experience of fire and rescue, just as it benefits from the experience of other members in policing or community safety matters. But ultimately, the panel took the view that it didn't need to co-opt subject matter, or the subject matter experts it was seeking was experts in scrutiny and in using and interpreting information rather than in fire and rescue or policing. And that matches the conclusions that were reached by the Essex Police, Fire and Crime Panel, for example, which is the first to go down this route. Having said that, the panel has other means of involving expertise, of taking input, than co-option. All of its meetings take place in public. There's the opportunity for members of the public to request to speak, or members of the public or representatives of external organisations to be invited to participate by the panel. So I don't think co-option is the route to go on that. But I also don't think that precludes the panel by any means from getting the benefit of the kind of expertise highlighted.
I think, personally, we're going to have so much change and disruption this year that I think we ought to perhaps just, wait and see what happens for the moment. We've got sort of, at least one person on joint committee, and others that are perhaps they're from the boroughs and...
I think the addition, we don't have the police feds represented
on
here, and although I think it's great that they are here and the opportunity, but I would be uncomfortable with, because you'd have to have the federation here as well, wouldn't it, to be fair, and et cetera, et cetera. So, and so it all gets a bit out of hand. But that doesn't take away your point, is that we've always got them in the audience too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've now found the place in the rules of procedure that I was thinking of, Chair. So, for example, page 10, the panel may invite people other than those referred to above, those being the Police and Fire and Crime Commissioner and his officers, to address it, to discuss issues of local concern and or answer questions. It may, for example, wish to hear from residents, stakeholders and councillors and officers in other parts of the public sector and may invite such people to attend. Yeah. So I hope that covers it.
We've got that option, haven't we? Yeah. Okay, so... I think, because it's right at the end of the year, I mean, the one thing that we did move was the early intervention. It was going to be this session, wasn't it, Nikki's a sort of report back on your early intervention, but we felt with 2 police and crime plans, it was going to be a bit too much. So I don't know whether, we maybe put that on the next meeting, maybe, as that's, it was going to be April. If we, and that was a little early, perhaps. But so perhaps we could bring that forward to the next one.
Chair, I think the action from the previous meeting is quite maybe informative for how we do, maybe how we think about changing things going forward. Was the request for understanding is like agreeing the precept, and then please come back and tell us what we get for our money that we've agreed, and trying to bring those two things a bit more together. And I appreciate that it can't be brought together as in absolutely everything goes to one meeting, because that would be absolutely overwhelming.
Do you mean the 2 different precepts?
So, well no, I mean if we take on the policing side. So on the policing side, we agreed the precept, but then the question for the Commissioner was, and then you need to come back to us and I'm paraphrasing slightly, tell us what we've just bought for our money.
That's
finding a way to bring that more together.
There is kind of a wider piece. Maybe the thing reflects it. Ultimately, the money is allocated to me by the public. I ask you for approval of a precept, offered up to provide you detailed information, and I go out of my way to make sure that we're open on it. But I think it's also really important that the kind of the performance pack and those kind of pieces, I'm afraid there's then no, without being rude, this isn't the police authority where someone can kind of go, well, we don't like you spending it over there, if you like. I don't mean this coming out wrong, but if you like, I've got the money, I in conjunction with the chief, and I've chosen to spend it. You're going to hold me to account how I hold the chief to account. The public hold me to account for how I spend it. Those are small, subtle differences, but they're quite important in how our relationship works. Has someone provided you with the...
We're just dealing with, what we put on the work programme for next time. I mean, we've got quite a few things that were left down there, but, I've mentioned the early intervention, I think we've got quite a lot on our programme, really, for the moment, to not put any of these others forward.
I think, to be fair with Robert's point, there comes a point when the IPCC do the appeal assessments, and that is the time when the Commissioner is really accountable for the effectiveness and the efficiency of the force and the monies he's had to spend that. So that will be really the bang for the buck in many ways, is actually seeing the performance improve and the effectiveness and efficiency of the force, etc.
They do, as those HMRC reports come out, then we do. It's HMRCFRS, isn't it now?
Yeah. Just on the timing of those, to inform this, the HMRCFRS report on fire and rescue, and obviously, look, HMRCFRS are there as an independent authority to give a report to me and to the public. You know, without being rude, they make some recommendations. You at risk, I suppose, in some respects. And there is a tension between PCCs and them, because actually quite often they go, well, we would like you to do all of this, or give me another 50 million and I can. But sometimes there is also that prioritisation. So it's almost there's not even a comply or explain, but you would expect me, and I would expect to come to you after at the July one, because the fire report I would expect to be out in June, and actually what they found, what's on a bit, and actually I'm formally expected to respond anyway in public. What do I think's good, bad? Do I agree with them? Do I disagree with them? I don't agree with everything that comes out of HMIC FRS. They actually sometimes perhaps a good example of that, I make domestic violence. They had a situation recently in Hampshire where they actually said they had come up with a programme that was endorsed by the College of Policing that said on certain domestic violence incidents, incidents, that they would do phone triage. HMICFRS said they were not happy with that, yet the evidence then went on to prove that there were better outcomes, people were more happy to disclose, and there was a better thing. So I just also put that bit, they're not the final arbitrators, if you like, the public decides, because we're all here to serve the public.
So are we saying perhaps
but I'm just saying the July one would have that one, and I probably expect the beginning of June-ish for the police one. So I'm looking at these dates, so you probably want the July one and the October one for us to have. So, yeah. Not beginning of June for police one. No, sorry, no. Beginning of September for that one. So the October one for police and the July one for fire one in terms of.
Perhaps if James could liaise with your office to perhaps put items on the agenda for the relevant times. Okay.
I think a point though is differentiate between effectiveness and efficiency and the level of funding that should be given, because even if we were comfortable that the force was highly effective and highly efficient, there still has to be a decision as to how much extra money is to be given, and it can't be I think it's not. You have to eventually make a decision where the tap gets turned off, and I think the difficulty is in deciding and bringing along the sufficient evidence and information to help people make that decision.
That usually comes with the when we did the sort of spending, the precept, or when you say this a review of the precept, you usually have that on the agenda, don't we? Yeah.
I can't get all of you turned on. Yeah, I'm not trying to be difficult, but I'm just the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, I'm depersonalise it for me. I make a recommendation to the panel for your endorsement, and I explain. And I obviously don't do so lightly in the view that you kind of go, well, and it has happened across the country. A number of PCCs had theirs turned down. I actually, the legislation is bad in your instance, and I encourage you to lobby against it. But I can change it by £1, and you can do nothing about it. So I'm not trying to be at odds with you, but I'm just sort of saying, understanding within the remit in terms of the legislation, you hold me to account how I hold the force to account, and then I'm held at the ballot box by the public. It's a slight fudge that took me some time to kind of get my head around. I found like I'm being difficult, so in other words, you quite rightly would go, I don't think you're spending money in that place is the right one. And actually, and we can disagree, and I wouldn't want to disagree with you, if you know what I mean, because it's not thing. But sometimes we might, and I'm just highlighting that.
But as they've done this press release today about the extra funding on the extra 100 PCs. That's sort of the feedback we've had, really.
Yeah, Chair, can I just add a little bit to the debate? I think it's more than just the way you hold the chief to account. It's also the basic function of a police and crime and fire commissioner, which is to run an effective and efficient a police service. In fact, that is your primary responsibility, and I think it's right to hold you account to that. And the only ways you can really hold you account to that is to look at the HMIC reports in a broad way, looking at all the areas to give us an indication on how effective and efficient. We're not going to just take one specific item, we'll look at it in the whole and then hold you account to appropriately. So I think it's not just about the way you hold account, it's about whether you actually achieve an effective and efficient police service.
I think we're dealing with, though, the work programme at the moment, so, yeah.
And then the beauty of it, coming back to what you were saying, if you look at the website, you can compare. You can put all the nearest neighbour, Derby, Lincolnshire, and you can see how they're doing compared to Northamptonshire. All the data are there. I mean, it's only you can go and have a look specifically or just broadly.
Yeah. Sorry.
I'll bring this down, but I would just finish off with saying, at the same time, I want to emphasise the difference between effectiveness, efficiency, and the amount of money. Because a police force could be incredibly effectively and efficient, but at the same time, you still have to make that decision of how much extra spend. You know, and that's
Stephen has to hold them to account for them using the money wisely. Can we move on to the dates? I just had a bit of a problem with the first date on that. It was the 4th of July. It's not because it's American Independence Day or whatever it is. That does clash with the local government conference. And last year we had difficulty in getting quoracy because it does tend to be that a lot of the local authority representatives that come here are the senior representatives that also go to the LGA conference, and we were short of people on that occasion. So James has suggested that maybe we move that to the 11th of July.
Which is the first day?
That's instead of the Thursday, yeah.
No, I'm saying it is the Thursday, the day.
Yes.
It's a Thursday, yeah. So it's exactly a week later than the Thursday the 4th that was on the list. And I have no problem with any of the others. I don't know of any particular issues. Is everyone happy with that? Yeah. Okay.
Chair, could I ask, we're going through a learning experience in relation to the wider remit. One of the aspects of that is starting today's meeting earlier. We'll clearly learn from that and take a decision about how to proceed. Would the panel be happy to set 2 o'clock as a default start time for these meetings, just to give a basis to work from? If that need is subsequently changed for some or all of them, then fine. But I would be happier to know what to give a start time as well as a start date, as well as a date rather than just a start time.
I would think personally 2 o'clock is okay, unless we've got the one with the 2 plans.
But did you say before that you were going to have a meeting in the morning for, say, the police, and then in the afternoon the fire?
Well, we did say that originally, but this one we've started at 1 and still managed to fit it in.
Okay.
Or we can start at 1. Yeah. Are you happy with 1? Yeah.
12:30. We started with a working lunch tomorrow. That works well.
Yeah. Well, James has actually got an idea on that lunch.
Well, if it becomes a standard approach that the panel has a activity in the morning and then the formal panel meeting in the afternoon, then there is an argument that provision of a lunch may be part of that, because we're requiring a whole day from you. But I don't think we're in the position yet where we're saying this is the programme of dates. On these dates there will be something in the morning and something in the afternoon. We can take that on a case-by-case basis. As things stand, I think we're saying all these dates except for the 11th rather than the 4th of July with a 1 o'clock default start.
I think 1 o'clock. Okay, everyone okay with that? And then if there's a particularly long one coming up, then we might make a change.
We're not going to hold morning activity for the sake of it. It will be if there's something that you can usefully do rather than taking up more of your time than we need to.
Okay. yeah, we've a very small item list. Yeah. Complaints and conduct, it's basically just a report on the standard report. James, do you want to?
It's a standard report that comes every 6 months. It's about looking at the overseeing the operation of the panel's complaints process, not about looking at complaints in detail. There are currently no outstanding complaints.
Okay. Okay. So if everyone's happy with that, then I call the meeting to an end. Okay, thank you very much for your attendance.
Just hand these out. These are something we work on the UK Modern Slavery Helpline and Resource Centre. I encourage you all to be more aware of it by my hand and hand.